Are relations at breaking point between the United States and Israel? In March 2024, the United States stunned international observers by abstaining from a UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Israel's ongoing war in Gaza. This has been followed by unprecedented US criticism of Israel's actions against the Palestinians. Having stood squarely behind Israel for decades, the moves have been seen as marking a pivotal moment in the relationship. But just how did the United States come to be quite so close to Israel, and could the latest tensions really mark a profound change in ties? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. In international politics, there are some relationships between countries that stand out as being exceptionally close. This might be because they share ethnic, linguistic or religious ties. At other times, states might share a strong common history or heritage, or have developed special economic or political links. One of the most interesting examples in modern international relations is the relationship between the United States and Israel. For over 50 years, the United States has forged an exceptionally close bond with Israel, providing it with vital economic, military, political and diplomatic support. And yet, surprisingly, this special relationship hasn't always been as close as it is now. While there's a long, complex and contentious history behind the emergence of Israel, our story really begins in the First World War, when Britain seized control of Palestine from the Ottoman Empire. In 1917, the British government declared its support for the creation of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. This was not only welcomed by many Americans who supported the principle of a Jewish homeland, but also endorsed by President Woodrow Wilson, who'd emerged as a champion of the idea of self-determination. However, while many subsequent American political leaders also favoured the creation of a Jewish state, over the next 2 decades, the US government took a cautious position on the question. With growing US interests across the increasingly strategic Middle East, Washington wanted to avoid alienating the Arab population in Palestine and the wider area. However, by the late 1930s, the situation was changing. With the rise of anti-Semitic fascism in Europe, pressure grew for the creation of a Jewish state. This all came to the fore at the end of the Second World War, when the full horror of the Holocaust emerged. While President Truman recognised the strategic importance of the Arab Middle East, which was already becoming a leading global oil producer, the US government nevertheless decided to support a proposal by the newly created United Nations to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab Palestinian states. Just minutes after Israel declared independence on the 14th of May 1948, the United States became the first country in the world to recognise it. But even at this stage, the United States still sought to keep a balance between the sides. As the neighbouring Arab states invaded Israel, Washington imposed an arms embargo on all the parties. By early 1949, Israel had defeated the attack and cemented its position on the world stage, joining the United Nations with US support. However, while Washington began to provide Israel with economic aid, its policies were now tempered by the emergence of the Cold War and the need to contain Soviet influence in the Middle East. This would come to the fore in 1956, when Britain and France colluded with Israel to support an Israeli invasion of Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. This gave London and Paris the pretext necessary to seize control of the strategically crucial Suez Canal, which the Egyptian government had just nationalised. Furious at the move, which he felt would only strengthen Soviet influence in the Arab Middle East, President Eisenhower forced Britain, France and Israel to withdraw from the territory. While the Suez Crisis would come to mark the lowest point in US-Israeli relations, the situation was beginning to change by the start of the 1960s. Under President Kennedy, US policy began to shift more openly towards Israel. In addition to increasing economic aid, military cooperation began to develop as the United States began supplying advanced weaponry to the Israeli forces. But in the end, The critical moment in the development of modern US-Israeli ties came in June 1967, when the Six-Day War saw Israel seize control of several strategic territories. These included the Palestinian-inhabited Gaza Strip and West Bank, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights, which was part of Syria. Although the United States joined with the rest of the international community to condemn Israel's occupation of the territories, it nevertheless marked a critical juncture, as leading Arab states, including Egypt, Syria and Iraq, forged closer ties to the Soviet Union. Washington came to see Israel as a vital ally in the Middle East. This strategic shift was highlighted when Syria and Egypt attacked Israel in 1973. As Israel ran low on weapons and ammunition, President Nixon authorized a massive airlift of supplies. While this operation was widely seen to have saved Israel, it also brought the United States and the USSR dangerously close to confrontation. As a result, in the years that followed, Washington focused on cementing Israel's position by trying to secure peace with its Arab neighbours. These efforts came to fruition in 1978 when President Carter brokered the Camp David Accords. This saw Egypt, which had by now broken from the Soviet Union, become the first Arab state to recognise Israel. American support for Israel continued to increase during the 1980s under the Reagan administration. As well as Washington's ongoing economic, political and diplomatic support, Israel and the United States enhanced their defence and intelligence cooperation, especially after a revolution saw Iran, which had previously been close to both countries, become overtly hostile. That said, there were also some notable points of friction. For example, the United States condemned Israel's 1981 annexation of the Golan Heights and was also critical of its invasion of Lebanon in 1982. Added to this, there were also growing tensions about the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank and Israeli concerns about American arms sales to Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, which steadfastly rejected Israel's right to exist. In 1991, the strategic landscape in the Middle East dramatically changed with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. The United States now became the unquestioned power broker in the Middle East, especially after it led an international coalition to defeat Iraq after it invaded Kuwait in 1990. This in turn opened the way for a concerted effort to resolve the decades-old Palestinian-Israeli conflict. This resulted in the 1993 Oslo Accords. Signed at the White House, this historic agreement saw the Palestinian leadership recognise Israel's right to exist in return for a commitment to the creation of a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza. Meanwhile, a little over a year later, Jordan became the second Arab state to recognise Israel. However, while the creation of a Palestinian state failed to occur, over the next 2 decades, American support for Israel remained strong. In addition to a well-organised lobby network, the emergence of a powerful right-wing Christian evangelical voice in US politics at the start of the millennium further cemented US support for Israel. For many Americans, Israel was seen as a strategically vital ally and a beacon of democracy in a region of Arab Muslim autocracies. All this fed accusations that while publicly Washington was calling on Israel to work towards peace and halt its settlement expansion in the West Bank, it was doing little to pressure its ally. Indeed, it continued to stand squarely behind Israel as new conflicts erupted. At the same time, Washington also provided vital diplomatic cover for Israel. As well as consistently vetoing Security Council resolutions condemning Israel, Washington also blocked Palestine's UN membership application in 2012. This support has continued over the past decade as the United States has continued to press Israel's case. In what many regard as his administration's most notable diplomatic achievement, President Trump brokered a series of landmark agreements, the so-called Abraham Accords, that saw 4 more Arab states, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan and Morocco, recognise Israel. Likewise, under the Biden administration, the United States has also continued to be Israel's leading supporter in various ways. On top of ongoing military and strategic cooperation, Israel receives around $4 billion annually in aid. Indeed, if one looks at the cumulative total since 1946, Israel is by far the world's biggest recipient of US assistance. So far, it's received $81 billion in US economic aid and a massive $216 billion in military assistance. It's against this backdrop that Hamas launched a massive insurgent attack against Israel on the 7th of October 2023 that left almost 1,200 dead, thousands wounded, and over 250 people kidnapped and taken hostage in Gaza. But while the United States stood firmly behind Israel's right to defend itself and supported its counterattack against Hamas, vetoing 3 UN resolutions calling for a ceasefire, disquiet steadily grew as Israeli forces moved from a massive aerial bombing campaign that killed tens of thousands to a ground assault that saw 2 million people herded into southern Gaza. In addition to a leaked State Department memo accusing Israel of violating international law, Biden was caught remarking that Israel was carrying out indiscriminate attacks. More recently, and after South Africa's decision to bring a case against Israel for violating the Genocide Convention, Chuck Schumer, the Democrat majority leader in the Senate and America's most senior Jewish political figure, warned that Israel risks becoming a pariah by its actions. As American efforts to rein in Israel's actions went unheeded, frustration steadily grew. This came to a head on the 25th of March 2024, in a move that surprised observers and marked the clearest possible signal of Washington's unhappiness. The United States abstained on a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. While the State Department sought to play down the decision, Israel was furious, accusing the United States of switching positions and undermining its efforts to defeat Hamas and release the remaining hostages. The Israeli government cancelled a high-level delegation that was due to travel to Washington to discuss the next steps in the conflict. Since then, relations have become even more strained. An Israeli attack on an aid convoy that left 7 foreign workers dead provoked international outrage, with Biden accusing Israel of not doing enough to protect Palestinian civilians. All this is seen as the most significant rift between the two countries in decades. But is this the start of a more fundamental breakdown of relations? On the one hand, tensions have been growing for some time. Even before the conflict in Gaza, the Biden administration was increasingly unhappy at how Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu openly opposed a Palestinian peace process. Observers also noted the poor personal relationship between the leaders. That said, it's also essential to keep things in context. While there are certainly difficulties, there's no sign that US support for Israel is fundamentally weakening. For example, despite the current tensions, the United States has just announced a major new military aid package for Israel. Ultimately, while there are evident problems in the relationship, there's little to suggest that the US and Israel are drifting apart strategically, at least at this stage. While Washington may still impose tougher measures, such as imposing restrictions on the use of US weapons, it seems inconceivable that it would cut Israel off completely. But in many ways, the real challenge could come at the end of the conflict. Many will expect Washington to follow its earlier peacemaking initiatives and try to broker a historic final settlement of the Palestinian issue. But will it be able to persuade the Israeli government to take the necessary steps for peace? After decades of supporting Israel, often as a lone voice on the world stage, one suspects that this could well be the point at which the special relationship is really tested. So, do you think that this marks the start of a more serious rift? And should the United States stand behind Israel, even if it shows no willingness to solve the Palestinian issue? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.